Good morning, everybody. My name is Jason McGilvray, and I am the Western Region Sales Manager for Maximum Controls, and I'm one of the product trainers. I want to thank Multi-Sales for putting this on, and thank you guys for showing up on a busy workday to come in and learn more about our products and how Maximum Controls works. We're going to go over how to set limits. We're going to go over troubleshooting. We're going to go over some product knowledge so you guys know what you're coming into out in the field in case you haven't worked on a particular machine before. We're going to get our hands on, and we're going to get some stuff done. Bob had mentioned, I've been in the business since 1999. I started out as a customer service rep in a manufacturer that made phone entry systems and gate operators, and that was after a couple different gigs out in the field working on electromechanical stuff my whole life.
You can share the names, they'll know it.
Yeah, I worked at Centex Systems, and they were purchased by Chamberlain Professional Products back in the day, and when they rolled up operations, I went to work for a distributor, worked there for 13 years, started out as a branch manager and left there after being the operations manager for the whole company, reporting to the director of operations. This is my third manufacturer now. I've worked in the RFID sector, and I don't know all the answers, but I got a really big Rolodex, although now we all do stuff digitally. So if I don't know the answers, I can find out the answers for you. So please ask whatever questions you've got, and we'll get stuff handled. So just quick show of hands for me so I know what's going on in the room. How many of you guys have worked on and or installed a Maximum Controls gate operator before? Got it, thanks. And for the rest of you guys, welcome to Max. A lot of what we do here is what I call Gate Operators 101. And we're going to go over some of the specs to help you guys figure that stuff out. Questions we all need to know when we're out there. If we're doing an install or bidding the job, you might not be the guys bidding the job, but this is stuff you're going to come across. How often, how heavy, how wide, and how. You know, we need to know, is it a swing or slide? You know, is it going to be high cycles or slow cycles? What kind of accessories do we need on there? What's triggering the gate? Are we using remotes? Are we using a phone entry system? Are they using RFID badges? Are they using a keypad? All that stuff's important when building the project, but it's important for us too when we're troubleshooting stuff. You know, if a gate's stuck open, what's holding it open? Is it something in the machine or is it something external? So we're going to go over all that stuff. We're going to go over our Matrix 3 boards, which is very similar to our actuator boards. And let's get after it. So what we've got here, this next slide, is just a broad overview of everything that we do. We do pad mount slide gate operators, pad mount swing operators. We've got multiple different actuator arms. We do some access control. We've got some keypad systems. And that going down in the middle down there is our actuator control box. So that board's very similar to the Matrix 3. We're going to go over that shortly. Now we are DC and we're brushless. So that means there's nothing touching inside our motors. And we'll go over that in a little more detail. I'm going to play a little slide here. This is a woman who goes over the difference between brushless and brushed motors, the advantages, and she does a lot better than I can. So I'll let our friend here do the talking for us.
Depending on your application requirements, you may be able to gain additional efficiency by choosing either a brushed or a brushless motor. Brushed motors have simplified wiring. They can be wired directly to DC power, and control can be as simple as a switch. They are also typically the less expensive than brushless motors. However, brushed motors are less efficient. The switching action of the commutators constantly creating and breaking inductive circuits creates a great deal of electrical and electromagnetic noise. Brushes and commutators also eventually wear out due to being in perpetual physical contact with the shaft. On the other hand, brushless motors tend to have a longer lifespan as they have no brushes to wear out. This also means that there is less maintenance required as there are no brushes to replace. They are also more efficient than brushed motors, typically featuring 85 to 90% efficiency compared to a brushed motor's 75 to 80% efficiency. This difference in efficiency means that more of the total power used by the motor is being converted into rotational force rather than being lost as heat. However, brushless motors tend to carry a higher initial cost as they require a commutating device such as an encoder and a drive or a controller.
Okay, does that make sense to you guys on the differences there? Okay, anybody worked on an old AC powered gate operator? You know, 115 volts, Leeson, A.O. Smith. She talked about the efficiencies in there. Those are maybe 60 to 65% efficient for how much electricity comes in and how much energy they produce. They run very hot. One of my past lives, I was an HVAC tech, and there's more than once that I got across an A.O. Smith or a Leeson motor when it's still too hot to work on, you know, and got that little imprint of the logo somewhere on my hands. They also took capacitors because they're hard to get going. You got to give them a kick to get them to run. DC brushless motors, why do we use them? A ton of torque. From the minute you give it an open command, it's rolling, and it's going to maintain that torque across the whole range, whether it's soft stop, soft start, getting the big gate moving, getting the big gate slowed down. They have a lot of torque, and you saw from the efficiency here, most of the electricity coming in is going back out in usable power, which is torque. Torque is what moves mountains. Now, a brush motor can get there, but it's got the brushes pushing on the commutator. So when those start to wear, that's little carbon particles that fall down in the motor. So over the long run, and maybe even not so long run, if you got a high cycle count at where you're working at, those brushes wear, the motors start running hotter, and they start losing torque. And that's a problem. Little residential setup, you might not notice it. Gated community, big industrial sites, stuff like that, it's going to be a service problem, and you can't get that stuff out of the motors. So eventually you're going to have to replace that motor, where ours, the only thing that's touching is the bearings in there. On our particular motors we use, we don't have the decals on these, but when you go out there, it'll tell you the model number of the operator, and you'll see a part of that decal there says these motors have been tested to 6 million cycles. That's not your warranty period, but that's how many cycles they've been tested to. So these things run cool, so they're not dumping extra heat under the cover and inside the chassis, and the torque stays consistent for the lifetime of the operator. Now, our boards are how we regulate the power. She talked about needing a controller for the motor, and we use what's called digital signal processing, DSP. Have you guys ever seen a video or been to a machine shop and seen how that stuff goes to the same place every time, all the time? Or the little robots that put all the components on boards like this? That's digital signal processing. So we can tell you where the gate operator's moving, where all that stuff's going at that same time. So our boards, if you went price for price against some other manufacturers' boards, we're a little bit higher across the board on some of that stuff, but all the technology's in here to run these motors efficiently all the time.
Less interference.
Yeah. Has anybody besides me in here ever forgot to set the switches on the loop detector so they didn't crosstalk? It's that same principle. The signals can mess stuff up. So to Bob's point, we put out very, very minimal EMI, which is the electromagnetic interference, and that's important. All right, on our motors, we're DC, so they're measured differently. But in our industry, we grew up in an AC world, so we're going to give you the AC horsepower equivalents on these motors. So we have a half, a 1 1/4, and a 2 1/4 horsepower motor across our line. It's different on the actuator arms. We go manual by weight and cycles on those. So if you guys are quoting a job out, or somebody in the home office is quoting a job out, and they had a 2 horsepower swinger or slider out there, then I'll show you in our catalog which ones to pick to fill that spot. Same thing on the sliders. The weight class and all that stuff's important on that. How we get our power into the units, it's called a toroid. Today, we're not using a toroid. We're faking them out because we've got power supplies on the table. But this is basically a transformer. It's a big donut in there with windings on it. It's got a little board in there. We can run off of 115 volts AC. We can run off of 220 volts AC. And for those of you who know your electrical power, we can also run 208 single phase AC. 208 and 220 are cousins. We can't take 3-phase power. We don't run into that a lot in Southern California in the areas you're at, but you may find that at some industrial sites and stuff like that. So we'll talk about that at a different time, how to mitigate that. But we basically run on all the common AC single phase voltages. We've got an AC line filter in there. If you guys have ever looked at stuff on an oscilloscope and see some crazy voltages, a lot of times it's by interference or by stepping down the voltage and stuff. Our regulator helps flatten that stuff out. We've got a built-in outlet down there at the bottom. That's your convenience outlet. That's for plugging in stuff like, yeah, it might not, yeah, you know, you might need to, there's also a convenience outlet in the operator itself. That's where you plug in stuff like your keypads or your mag locks and stuff like that. There's a limited amount of amps in there, so you can't put a whole ton of stuff in there. But that's what it'll do for us. We can We can go as low as 90 volts AC and as high as 240 volts AC. 240 is running hot and 90 is really low. I'm sure you guys have experienced out here what we call the rolling blackouts, where it's just enough to bounce the lights, make your computer skip, maybe mess up your cable box, and the light starts blinking on the microwave. So we help with the filter, we can help that out. But with 90 volts, we can still run. It's not recommended to do it for a long time, but we can go to 90 volts. If it comes in at 240, we're going to flatten it out. And I'll show you later on the board how we measure the voltage. We're a 24 volt system, but we have more than that available for you guys to work with for those cases if the voltage is going like this. Do you guys do any solar on your pad mount stuff or on actuator arms? Do you guys get asked about that?
I did two of them on.
Two of them. Did you use our Max solar pack?
Nice.
Plugs right in, right? In place of the toroid, you drop the toroid out and you put the Max solar pack in there. It's ETL approved, but it's also UL listed. UL originally got started to regulate power supplies because buildings were burning down, stuff was catching on fire. So they wanted to make sure everything was safe for everybody. All the manufacturers, not just Max, when we send our machines in, besides making sure that everything is compatible for our UL 325, which is our entrampment stuff and all those other things, they check the electrical power. I know some guy, I live up in the San Fernando Valley, so there's a lot of the electrical inspectors out there know more about what we do than a lot of us do. So if they come in, I can buy a charge regulator. I can put some batteries on the ground, which is not where they belong. I can buy a solar power and wire it up. But when they open up that operator and see all that stuff that doesn't look like it came from the factory, even if you wired up clean, if they told you that didn't pass because it's not factory power, they're not lying to you. It's correct. With this, you've got something that's listed. So I'll make sure you guys have my business cards later. We're not going to do a real deep dive into this today. You can get your solar panels from these guys here at Multi-Sales. If you end up doing solar stuff, you can call me. Like I said, you'll have my cards. Hey, Jason, what's that solar thing we talked about? And I can help you get your shopping list put together. But it's basically what's got in there is two 35 amp hour batteries, two 7 amp hour batteries, charge regulator, fuses, bolts right up. You land your solar power. And as our friend here said, they work great. So appreciate that. This goes back to wiring up the power inside the operator. This is covered in our manuals, and we'll show the manuals when we're going into some stuff here. It's really simple. It's really important that you set this switch to 115 or 220. If you put 220 to 115 power supply, that stuff called the magical smoke comes out and it doesn't work anymore. So you just have to be aware of that. If you put 115, if it's set to 220, you put 115 to it, it's just not going to work. But the other way around, voltage is voltage. It cooks components just as much as it'll cook bacon. So we got to be aware of that stuff when we're in there. Any questions so far? You guys good? All right, now we're going to do a little bit of stuff in the catalog. So if you guys grab this blue catalog, you guys can keep these. The manuals I need to keep because I'm doing another class for these guys tomorrow. But I can hook you up with a way to get resources. We're going to start looking at our slide gate machines. So if you turn to page 4 inside the gate operator manual, or excuse me, in the catalog here, this is the Maximum Controls product line. Now you won't see this is an older slide. There's a different slide. We're going to go over the ones up on top here. Basically, on every one of our operators, the number is the weight class. So if you look at that top row, we got an MXG 2300, MXG 1800. And we got the 2300 stainless steel and the 1800 stainless steel. Can anybody guess what the weight capacity is on those gate operators in pounds? 18, right? The next row, we got a 1500, 2200, Max F18 Pro, Rhino 5500. Bottom row is a 1200, 1700, and a 4000. The wild card in there is the F18. Are you guys aware of your UL 325 classifications for gate installations? We got class 1 is residential. Class 2 is multifamily, still be residential. It can be a commercial place where the public goes in and out, places like that. Class 3 is a place where the general public's not coming in. Class 4 is going to be a full secured facility where they might even have a guard. It could be law enforcement, could be a data center, could be a place like that where the general public's not coming in. In those applications, we're allowed to go 18 inches per second. So that's why that one's called the F-18, because it can move a little bit faster. You cannot use these for residential. Everybody wants stuff to be fast. I get it. I want stuff to be fast too. But because of things that have happened in the past, stuff that's going on, people getting hurt or whatever, and just physics, fast isn't always good. Because that one's fast, it'll only do 1,600 pounds. So there's a manufacturer that makes rail drive gate operators, and they come in a big green fancy box. They can do heavy and fast just by the nature of how they're designed. You need to talk to these guys if that comes up in an application. But for us, that's as fast as we can go. Now, are we LA County down here, or are we Orange County?
Orange County.
Orange County, okay, we're just across the line. So the fire department in the county down here came up with a regulation that any slide gate operator, when the power's off and the battery backup is depleted, needs to be able to be back driven with no other interference. They need to be able to pull up and get in this property. So what we did, the way we went to market with that, is you see the machines with the FS part number in our catalog? Yeah. Those are fail-safe machines, which means if the power's out and the battery backup's depleted, you can back drive that gate. I've helped back drive a 4,000-pound gate. I wasn't wearing my fancy Western boots that day because I needed the traction and we backing up into that thing and moving slow, but it can be done. The general population's not going to know that that can happen, but that's what we can do. We also put a switch in there so that you can turn the power off if for service reasons or whatever you guys want to move it out of the way. There's also the Max app, which we're going to go over later, where you can release the gate so you can get off the property. On our fail secure machines, except for the Rhinos, we make a device called a chain drop. What this is, it's got a little bullet in it. I'll find my keys later. This takes, if you've ever seen the Max triangle key that holds the cover latch on and the cap on the top of the swing gate operators, the Megatrons, it's that same key. Basically what it is this bolts to your chain bracket. The chain, the link goes in here, and with the key engaged, you're good to go. If you release the key, it spits the bullet out, and you can drop the chain and move the operator out of the way. These are about $195 your guys' cost here. It's all stainless steel other than the decals and the plastic parts on top. And it can be a good solution for you. Some of the other manufacturers, they do foot pedals. And foot pedals work. You know, it's just a lever that pops the pins out of whatever the drive unit is. One issue with those for me, because remember I worked wholesale, I've sold pretty much everything in this building, is some of them have the hook on it for putting a padlock on it. So if you don't have the key or the master key, you can be stuck. And a caution on dropping a chain on any slide gate, not just ours, is we have to watch out for what the driveway pitch looks like. If we look at the UL 325 and DASMA is another organization that's about the design and installation and fabrication of gates, they're going to tell you no uphill or downhill slides, and they've got some words to say on swing gates too. It's just gravity. As a young guy working on a vehicle in the driveway with a buddy in high school, we didn't realize the driveway wasn't perfectly flat, and we hadn't chocked the wheels when we dropped the drive shaft on a 1955 Chevy truck. And I'm watching the truck drive over the top of me as it goes down the driveway. Luckily, Mark caught his truck and it didn't go any farther. So as soon as you drop a chain or you hit a foot pedal, if it's on a slope, there's a real possibility that it's either going to roll in the pocket or it's going to come closed. So just be aware of that. It's a caution. You know, I've rarely seen pool table flat on an installation, but it's something you got to be aware of, especially if it's really steep. Because when it comes to the safety and all the stuff we're doing here, and I'll repeat this a lot, we have to think about when, not if, because it's going to happen. You know, we have to have that mindset. As professionals, we need to look at that stuff. So that covers our those. On our MXGs, these are a different setup. If you've ever worked on our Pro Series sliders, this has got a different chassis. It's got 100 pounds more capacity than a 2200, 100 pounds more capacity than an 1800. It's got a different board in it, which is called our Omega board. I don't have one of those with me today. These gate operators have been in service now for a year, If you know how to program a Matrix 3, it's the same thing. It's just a little bit simpler. A lot of people find this Matrix board a little busy until somebody showed them how to use it. But we've simplified some stuff. The battery monitoring and charge regulating is better than the older board, but it'll still do the same stuff. One big difference on this board is we took away the normally closed hookups for the safety inputs, and everything's 10K now because you can get 10K photo eyes. And you can double down on those inputs. So if we're doing like a slide gate, which these are, we need to have 2 devices, right, fellas? So if we've got an edge and an edge, but we also need another device in the back, you can put a photo eye on that same input, because what the board's going to log is either an open or a closed event when the ERD hits. So
now we could plug 2 in the same.
you can put 2 on the same spot. It's not going to tell you that it was necessarily that it was the photo eye that tripped or the edge, but you know that it's something that happened on the back side or something on the front side. So you can do that because it's still going to track that input. All right. You guys have any questions on our slide gates? Okay. This picture reminds me of a question I get all the time. I'll go over it in a minute. If you've ever worked on some of the older gate operators, say like the Elite CSW 200s and the SL 3000s, and short note on that, my boss and his brother founded Elite Gate Operators back in 1985. They sold to LiftMaster in 2003. My boss, which is Alex Parsadan, he started Maximum Control 16 years ago, so he's been around a while. But there's not a whole lot going on inside the machine. We've got a gearbox that bolts directly, or the motor bolts directly to the gearbox bolts to the chassis. We've got batteries, we've got a board, and a bunch of harnesses. There's not a lot of stuff when you get in there to have to work on to sort stuff out. It's all modular. Now, if you look at these are not handles. They look a little flimsy, and I remember asking my lead engineer about it. Jake, why are these handles so flimsy? And he goes, my buddy, that's not what they are. When they went from the Matrix 1s, which mounted flat, to the Matrix 3s, the first time they put a cover on, they sheared all the dials off. So these are guides. You know, now in the back of my truck on the diamond plate, I've shifted an operator gently with these to get it slid in so I could strap it down, but these aren't handles. But you'll see them on there. So that's on the mounted on the frame. This will go into our MXGs. You can see that this is a little bit different setup. The motor, the Omega board, is mounted vertical. The toroid power supply is behind the board and in between the gearbox. We see we've got a box enclosure over the top of that now that's clear plastic. So when you're out there working on stuff, this keeps Mother Nature's minions out of there a lot more.
Yes.
This board's not bad and it's sealed, but if any creatures get in here, you can have a problem. And one note on that, make sure that you replace or keep the bolts that hold the side of the chassis down. If that's in there, the only place they can get back here is in the meat grinder on a slider. But if there's any space for them to get in, they will find it. If you guys haven't come across it, I'm sure somebody on your crew has. Mice, rats, lizards, spiders are still a pain in the neck, snakes, little bunnies.
I had a squirrel. I don't know how they got in there.
Well, squirrels can pretty much flatten themselves out and their head's about the size of a walnut. So if they can get their head in there, they'll fit in there.
They're mean and things.
Oh yeah. Hey, that's their house, homie. They're not happy with that. No, then he thinks he's part of the crew. He wants to get in the truck with you. You don't want to feed him. So this particular enclosure, they're working on it right now. They're doing some testing. They're going to do that same style enclosure for our swing gate operators for the Megatron family. We've had really good success with that. Same thing. It's not really busy. You know, we got the board inside the enclosure. You got the frame. You can see that frame's different. It does not have the same footprint as the other sliders. Gearbox, motor, the mounting plate where everything else can mount on the back, batteries. Something about our gear reducers. See, this one's yellow. This is a back drivable gearbox. If you get out to one of our operators, older, a site you haven't been to, you're not sure what's under the cover, what's under the hood, you lift that cover off. If you see a yellow gearbox, that means it's a back drivable gate operator. It's going to be one of the FS family on a slider. Swing gates, we don't care. We got a release clutch. Those are usually gold. But this will tell us that that one's an MXG, and that one's back drivable. And if you look at this board here, going back to page 4, and compare it to this board here, you can see that there's still a lot of connections, but not as many. It's going to program the same, which is one reason I'm not going to dive too deep into it. We learn the limits the same way. We enroll the devices the same way. We can get in the system, look at the events and all that other stuff. All that stuff happens the same way.
Yeah, you have the USB port too.
Yes. Yeah, we'll go over that one in detail, but he mentioned that one. One thing on our boards, on all of our families of the new generation of stuff, Matrix 3, DSP, actuator arm controller, in the Omegas, we have an OBD port on there, which is a USB stick. So we store 8,000 events on there. So think about it like if you've ever taken your car to the mechanic because you got to check engine light or whatever it was. You know, I had an old Toyota we just recently retired 2 years ago, 1999, had a few thousand miles on it. And whatever the P146 was like a stuck injector or an O2 sensor or something, I can't remember. We'll tell you with the codes what happened. Do we have a photo open error, photo close error? Was the motor not rotating? There's a whole line of stuff that we're going to go into with some slides, and I'll teach you guys how to download stuff off of here that tells you what's going on. We can also access that through the programming menu on the unit. We can look at the last 20 errors. So that's where most of your stuff's going to be. That's important. I think the only other guys that started doing this now is Automatic's got a similar function. And one of the high securities, I don't know if that revision's still out there, they had one where you had to do a really deep dive through the programming menu to get in there and find it, but you could look at some of that stuff here. But this stuff will be pretty simple, and it'll show you guys how to do that. So we're good on sliders? Cool. All right, this is the swing gate family for our pad mount units. So we're going to skip some pages here. And if you look through as you're flipping through, these are what our new cut sheets look like. So if you download these off our website and you need them for your submittals for a client, this is what the graphics and everything's going to look like. So if you go towards the middle of the book, which is going to be page 17, this is our swing gate family for our pad mount units. And this will go to something I brought up earlier about the horsepower equivalents on the motors. So in your catalog, you'll see a Megatron 1400 Pro. You'll see a Megatron 2200 Pro. You'll see the Max Tank. You'll see a Megatron 1400 HP and a 2200 HP. So we basically have 3 weight classes across 3 chassis because the HPs are one size, and it stands for high profile, not high performance, even though they're high performance machines. And then we've got the tank. I mentioned a little bit about our company history. You know, my boss and his brother sold lots of CSW 200s, whether they were half horsepowers, dual motors, 1 horsepowers. They sold out to LiftMaster. LiftMaster continued to make CSW 200s, and then they came out with the 24 ULs. The 24 ULs have the same footprint as a CSW 200, so swapping those in and out on a changeout's a piece of cake because the arm geometry and everything else is the same. My boss can probably tell me within about 50 units of how many CSWs he built back in the day. He can do the math and guess how many LiftMaster sold. So our Megatron HPs will drop right on the pad. Arm geometry is the same. We have some other advanced features and stuff that we do differently. But if you need to do a change out, it can be a good way to go. If you haven't done a Max unit yet, it might be a good one to cut your teeth on because you may have to touch up some stuff on the gate where everything mounts up. Our arm geometry is the same. T-bar, all that stuff looks the same. We do make a long arm kit. So if you guys are speccing or working on a gate that's more than 15 feet wide, make sure to order the long arm kit. It just has to do with the geometry and getting everything set right with your A, B, and C dimensions of how far off, how far over, and how far we got to reach. Think about it like trying to swing this door, trying to grab the door here versus grabbing the door here. Where are we going to have the longest leverage, right? So on a wider gate, we need a longer arm so the gate doesn't struggle. Has anybody ever seen a swing gate close and do this or open and do this? A lot of time it's the geometry, how it's set up. So it's not always perfect out there, but we give you the stuff inside that book to be able to look at it.
I got a question on that.
Yeah.
You guys carry like the arm that has the ball joint for like uphill?
Okay.
It's not a big uphill, but
I understand. I live up in the San Fernando Valley. Laurel Canyon, Coldwater Canyon, Malibu Canyon, Canaan Road,
yeah.
all the stuff up above Calabasas and stuff. And we get people out there trying to make Lamborghini doors to get this stuff to lift up because the driveway's steep or it's curved or whatever. UL 325 and DASMA say we should have no uphill swings. Now, we do not make an arm with the ball joints and stuff in it. We just don't have one. Have I seen units used to like get up over a curb moderately and stuff like that? Yes. We do not make that arm. I said our arm geometry is the same, right? Okay. You can talk to your supplier, but it's got to be moderate. If stuff starts breaking and we know that's on an uphill, we're going to say it's a warranty problem. And jumping ahead a little bit too, actuator arms, they're linear actuators. They need to be flat. I've seen people try and do stuff and it just breaks them. Just think about this with your arm. An actuator arm doesn't have a wrist, it's got an elbow, but it doesn't pivot like mine. It doesn't have a shoulder. So they have to be flat. So a lot of times a solution can be, a lot of times here too, we see it when a slide gate gets mounted up. It's no problem. 99% of the time it's inside the property. I've seen some unique stuff done, like it's mounted up on the top instead down the bottom, or we do rear mount stuff. On swing gates, for convenience, you pull out of a gated community, the gates are on the outside because the gates pull open and nobody has any patience. As soon as it's wide enough to squeeze the car through there, they're going to roll through there. On actuator arms, we can do push to open. So say we've got a steep driveway or something like that, as long as you've got enough offset for the street so we're not going out into the boulevard, we can push to open for those places where you might, where it would have to swing up to get inside the property. So you just have to be careful with our mounting. I mean, for security, the swing gate should be on the inside so that they pull in, but people bang into them and it frustrates their patience. So that's stuff you guys will see in the field. That's the basics on that one. Yeah. Right. So if we turn into pages 18 and 19, this will tell us that a 1400 can do 1,400 pounds at 15 feet, 1,200 pounds at 20 feet. That's just a geometry problem there. I haven't bowled in a long time, but I know that it's easier to hold a 10-pound ball out here than an 18-pound ball out here. And it's the same thing with gates. It's about the leverage. It's about your hinges. It's about everything else. The 2200, looking down here, we can handle, I'm looking at this upside down, 2,200 pounds at 15 feet, 1,800 pounds at 20. 20 is a good span. I'm 6 feet tall. So this is 6 feet here. So 20 feet's wide.
Lately, everybody like wanting 20 feet short.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they want like a swing gate.
We can do it, but we can't do wide and heavy. So you got to watch your materials. Another thing, you guys probably get affected by it down here too, is like the Santa Ana winds. Where I live up in the San Fernando Valley, there's times where we got gusts at 45, 50 miles an hour. Well, anything over 30 is considered like a storm. So we have to be careful. Is the gate fully clad? Those are other questions that can add to the wind load. And there's no charts on that stuff. You just guys have to be aware. Sometimes it could be more cost effective to put in 2 smaller panels because it's going to open faster. At least the usable space is going to open up faster. They may or may not think they've got the budget for it, but in a certain application, maybe they don't have a spot to land operators on both sides. That same thing can happen on sliders. They may have a 40-foot opening out there, but they might not have a spot to land that other machine. But the effective speed is if we've got 2 20-foot panels, is we're pulling open in opposite directions, that space opens up a lot faster. Same thing on the swings. The HP Pros have the same weight capacity on them. Now here's where stuff gets really different. Go to page 22 on the Max. This gate operator, just the unit alone weighs 325 pounds. That gear reducer is huge. When we move these at the shop, we've got one of those hydraulic little pallet jacks to lift them up and put them in the back. I've delivered a couple out of my van. And you have to be very careful with these to get them down. It's got grab hooks on the gearbox if you want to use some kind of cable or chain to lower them. This one will do 4,500 pound gate at 10 feet. It'll do a 3,000 pound gate at 30 feet. So imagine how fast that edge, that leading edge of that gate's moving across that distance. It's got some very specific installation instructions. You're not going to be running down to Ace Hardware and buying some really cheap little barrel hinges like you'd use at home if you're putting something up. You're not going to find the gear you need for this at Harbor Freight. But if you got something that's heavy and wide, these are a really popular machine. In certain cases, they can also help out with the wind load as well because it's more powerful and the ERDs are more powerful. We see a lot of these going into airport facilities, law enforcement facilities where they need to get something heavy. You know, it might be 10, 15 feet wide, but it's fully clad and they need it to be able to work. So, you know, most gated communities aren't going to use something this big. Do a lot of ranches. One of the territories I cover is Texas. And I cover Oklahoma. And there's guys, you know, up in the Northwest where they got these big ranches or wineries down south of here where this thing's made out of logs, or it's this big custom, you know, metal gate that's got jumping unicorns and all that other stuff cut into it where it's fully clad and needs to work. This can be a good application for that. Now, one of the things I talked about, and you can see it on the, you can see a little bit on this picture here. If we go back to page 19, it's a little bit better view. Is we have our release for our clutch in the T-bar up here, and that output shaft is 3 1/4 inches. Most other operators might be 2 1/4, 2 inches. I think one of the automatic machines has a really big one, but it's like aluminum on the clutch, and it's got a hasp that has to be latched down for it. This has a big advantage because it's more friction material. The way we adjust those things is we tighten them down, and it works like the brake on a train, where it's just two metals coming together. And what happens with that is it gives us more friction space. So on a heavy gate, say it's windy, something like that, you want that handle tight when you adjust it, tight enough to be able to pop it down with your hand and give it a tug to get it up. You don't want to be using a pry bar on it because it's too tight, but it needs to be tight. I was doing a tech support call the other day, and don't get scared if you call into tech support and hear Maximum Control Sales, this is Jason. I don't know what line's ringing into my phone when it comes on. I'm primarily the sales guy. This guy keeps losing his limits on the swinger. And what happened was it wasn't tight enough. So every time it got open, it kicked a little bit. Every time it came closed, it was kicking a little bit, and then it started losing the script. So he had to go out and adjust that, and everything was fine. And what he did once we had it set up, if you look on the top of there's an output shaft that goes on there, and there's a collar. He just took a Sharpie pen and indexed it where it was. We also have a pin in there to keep it located. But with that Sharpie pen, before he adjusted stuff out, he said, just make a mark. And we ran it a couple cycles, and he could see the incremental change where it just kept moving off of the index where it needed to be. So we got that one solved pretty easily. But this will help. If that gate gets forced, say somebody hits it, it can shift. Back when I first got into this business with the AC machines, they would say, lock that arm tight. If you put just a couple of degrees of English in it, when it gets hit, the elbow effect comes in. So and on an AC machine, the other thing with the DC motors that I forgot to mention earlier, when we cut the power, it stops. On the AC machines, you cut the power, and it go just that little bit. And it go just that little bit on a slider. Swingers, the same thing. They cut the power, and they could come in. But if you put just a little bit of English in that arm, it'll shift on there. Now, I talked about indexing it and stuff earlier. Cool thing is on our DC motors, we use what's called a Hall effect sensor. So our lady with the polo shirt talked about using a Hall effect sensor and encoder. An encoder is got a little hole in a wheel, and it shoots through and it's looking at a sensor. So every rotation it gets one read. We get 30 reads every rotation. So we're very precise in where we're at. So say somebody hits that gate and forces it a little bit but doesn't break anything. We know how many rotations we're supposed to go. So if that gate gets pushed off, it's a service call if you guys need it or want it to be. But a lot of times you can tell them, give it an open command, because it'll open back up and it'll come back closed where it was, even if it shifted a little bit on that clutch. Problem our buddy had is his clutch kept shifting all over the place every time, and it just couldn't keep up because it was loose. But with we'll go back to the position we were at. That's also if it gets forced. You know, somebody pushes it or it comes off that limit, it'll go back to where it was supposed to be as long as everything's in good shape. Another one I came across, and this one was probably 2-3 weeks ago, is the gate looked like it was okay, but when it was doing some weird stuff out there. When the gate was closed, everything looked tight. When the guy got the gate to the open position, I said, go see if the gate's wiggling on us. Because even if that arm's just got a little bit of English in it, it's still going to be tight. He goes, man, this thing's flopping like crazy. So he goes out there and checks, and that plate, they had a good mounting plate put on there. That gate had been hit, and it had popped 4 out of the 5 welds on that plate. So it wiggled. And then when he checked his arm, and it was binding too, when he checked his arm wasn't flat anymore. It had a dip in it. So his geometry was off. He was tripping ERDs, and the gate was doing weird stuff. So a lot of times your guys' best troubleshooting tool, for those of us who wear these, and those of us who don't need them yet, is to go out there and just get your eyeballs on stuff. See how it looks, see how it sounds. How do those hinges sound? Is the gate staying straight, or are they starting to touch at the top? Because maybe the hinges are blasted. So that's just some more swing gate stuff here. Any questions on that, guys? All right, we'll do a couple more slides here, and we'll take a little bit of a break. So our swing gates are the same way. A bunch of common components across the family lines. We got a chassis, we got a gearbox. On that one, there's a flange that the motor bolts up to, but it still bolts straight on. Up on the top, we've got limit switches, our cams that work the limit switches. I'll show you these on the chassis. We've got a loop rack. We got our matrix board, and we've got the motors here that plug in, and everything's on the top. And you can see that T-bar and everything up there. If you worked on certain brands, that looks really familiar because the geometry is the same. That's one of the things that makes it easy to get in there. All right, I just talked about this one. Able to auto-recover swing operation after car collides into the gate while opening or closing. So that can avoid damage in a service call. Now, sometimes if somebody hits it bad enough, you guys are going to get out there. You may be doing some welding, you may be replacing some stuff. We have enclosed limit switch modules. So if you guys look on the back of these test units up here, these are set up as slide gates as far as the brains go. Our limit switches are up here, and they're sealed. They're up on the top and the back. So if you tilt this over, you can see those switches there. We use a Matrix 3 board. Our Matrix 3 boards are Matrix 3 boards. Now, if you get a Rhino, it'll say Rhino on it because it's got a little bit bigger heat sink on it, because our Rhinos are heavy-duty sliders. The tanks have a bigger heat sink on them too, and it doesn't hurt you to run like a Rhino board on one of these because it's just the board, it's got a bigger heat sink on it. On the swing gates, it's the same board. Now, what tells it what it is over here on the left-hand side of the board. This is called an ID plug. This one here says it's a 2200 Pro slider. With this pulled out, it says there's no valid ID plug. If I plug this back in, and they're cable tied on there, so it can be a little bit tricky to push it back in. Just make sure you get it lined up. I was at a training at a different event and forced that sucker in and folded 2 of the pins over. And we had to get out some tweezers and fix the board on the fly. But that's what tells it what it is. We've got 3 sizes of brushless DC motors. A 1400 is a 0.5 horsepower plus. Back in my AC days, I would have called it a 3/4 horsepower. We've got the 1.25 horsepower, I believe. Let me double check my specs. Yeah, it's actually 1.25 horsepower for the 2200. And then the tank has 2.5 horsepower. So that goes the equivalence again. All right, another cool feature we've got is our gear reducers. It's a cast iron gearbox with bronze gears. So bronze is a good metal because it's strong and it doesn't gall very easy. So it doesn't wear very much, and they run quiet. We're running the equivalent of a Mobile Synthetic 1 gear oil in here. You could put that gear reducer in the freezer or put it out in the parking lot if you're working out, Ontario or someplace hot. If you're doing anything out towards the desert, it doesn't matter. The viscosity is not going to change. Now, in extreme cold conditions, which we really don't see that often in Southern California, You might want to put a strap heater on the gearbox. We don't make them, but they're easily available to get out there if you're worried about the viscosity. We've got a ton of these in Arizona, Nevada, Texas, Palm Desert, and the heat doesn't bother the gearboxes at all. So if you guys